Dr. Mary Jo Leddy is an author, teacher, and an activist who champions hospitality in not only her words, but her life. She's someone who has worked with Romero House, which is a place that welcomes refugees to live together with them. And she's living together with them for many years and decades and exemplified what it is to welcome the stranger. And you'll tell through what she is saying how much she has been transformed by the stranger or by the guest. And that's a significant point that we're going to get from this time.
I simply want to say it's going to be so difficult because this is about a whole culture. It's about capitalism. It's about consumerism. It's about all the issues that surround empire, that we are a colonial people. Uh, we are a people who have been taught to own things and to have property. And we are very nervous when that power and property is taken away from us or we give it away. So I think each of you here and myself, that pot has been stirred. We can't just think about, oh, hospitality, come in, be at home. It's going to involve something deeper within our lives. And what I simply want to say as we go home is take courage. Take courage and realize that St. Augustine said this marvelously. Once you begin to ask a question, what is hospitality? Once you go down that road, the question has already evoked an answer deep within you. It's already there. You just need the time and the space, the community of people to be with you as you ask these profound questions. Um, some of you will have heard my paradigmatic story about the house for the car many times, but I'm going to repeat it. Okay. Very early on, as we were beginning Romero House, we had an old house on a hill, and there was a backyard and a porch. And one afternoon, I was sitting having tea uh, with a young woman from Africa who had just arrived from a refugee camp. And we were chatting away. Her English was quite good. And she said, "Who live out there?" I said, "Nobody lives out there." I looked out, and there was a backyard, a little path, garbage pails, a garage. I said, "Nobody lives out there." She said, "Yes, person out there, house out there." And I looked out on my backyard, which I thought I knew very well. And the only words I could say was, "It's a house for a car." We call it a garage. And I looked at that little hunk of wood in the backyard in a new in a new way. it was a house for a car. And the only words I could say to her was, um, "We build houses for cars here." She said, "Really? Really?" And I said, "Yes, we build houses for cars." And again, she said, "Really?" And every time I said it, it was more ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. And subsequently to that conversation, I sat and drank a cup of tea and looked at the backyard and looked and looked. And finally, I talked with our staff and I said, "Did you know we have a house for a car in the backyard?" And they say, "A house for a car? What do you mean?" I said, "Just take a look. We have one of those." I felt like I was talking about the Stalag in Russia. And we talked about it and talked about it and said, this was 30 years ago. We said, given the housing crisis in our city, the housing crisis 30 years ago, let's see if we get a building permit to change the house for a car into a room for a person. And we said, yes, we're going to march down to City Hall. We had grown accustomed to that then, knocked on the door, presented the permit application to some terrified bureaucrat. And he said, "What do you want?" And I said, "We want to turn a house for a car into a room for a person." And he said, you could just hear the breath. "You can't do that." I said, "Why not?" He said, "Then everybody would do it. Everybody would do it." This is 30 years ago. Imagine if in the intervening years that we had built a house for house for a person in every backyard in this city, there would be no problem. And I said, "Well, then everybody would do it. That's great." And then this terrified look was floating through the air. And he said, "You just can't do that." And I said, "Okay, we'll be back." We had another meeting. And we decided we would turn the house for a car into a room for God. We would make a little chapel in this backyard. But this time, we would not ask for a permit because we were sure some bureaucrat was going to refuse that request to turn a house for a car into a room for God. And 30 years later, I just think it's that simple. We live in a culture that builds houses for cars. And it is very difficult to build a house for God when that is taking place. That's the depth of what we are talking about. space for a person, space for God, room in the inn. It will not come easily at all. We're kidding ourselves. But I also want to say, and this is in tune with St. Augustine, Hannah Arendt, you have within you, we have within us the capacity to make something new. We have within us the dream of a better society. We know, even if we can't fully articulate it, we know that there is another way of being, a good way. And it isn't some dream queen thing out there. There's enough power in this room to do something different. And Hannah Arendt, this great philosopher, Jesse knows, said that every social movement begins somewhere, sometime. People begin to say, there is another way. We can do this. We can do this. And you gave this wonderful description of rent a mum. You know, we wish we could rent a mum. I'm for that. You know, you could start a whole new movement. Stone soup, rent a mum, to, kind of thing. It's possible. And we have the wisdom. We heard it this morning. We have so much wisdom and we have so much courage. We really do. We have the power to begin another way and to let go of all of these imperial powers that we dare not speak about. But if you have Anglican imperial domes, we Catholics have them better. Big, tall buildings with nobody in them. Ridiculous. That's what I would like to say.